Hello guys, welcome back to our first tutorial on CSS. So we've been talking and learning HTML all this while. It's time to get into CSS and the thing that we actually use to style and beautify our page. Alright, so what then is CSS? CSS stands for cascading style sheet, and what it basically does is it adds color to our web page. It adds basic styling. It basically beautifies our web page. So if you can remember our analogy we used, where we talked about HTML as being the structure of a building, right? The foundation and just bare blocks, right? But no painting, no furniture. So we can think of CSS as those furnitures and your paintings, your art, and all of those other things, right? So the C in CSS stands for cascading, and what cascading means is to pour down. So in CSS it basically means that there is inheritance and overriding. So to explain that further, let's say you have a child element that's nested inside a parent element, right? So if you give that parent element a color, a text color of, let's see, red, right? So the child element inside of that parent element is going to inherit that color of red. Now on the overriding part, regardless of the fact that you've given your parent element a color of red, right, which the child element inherits, if you go ahead to give that child element a color of, let's say, blue, that child element is going to override that parent element's color of red, and the child element is going to assume the color of blue. Great. So let's move to CSS rule. So CSS basically styles our web page, and it does this using sets of rules, right? And a CSS rule is made up of two main parts: a selector, that is the thing that you are going to be applying the styling on, or the thing that's going to select a particular element on your web page, and then a declaration block, what you want to happen to that element. So I've given us some examples. So as you can see, this is how the syntax is. You have your selector and you open a set of curly braces, and inside that curly brace you give that selector a property and a value, right? So if you look around here, you see this h1 element below, and that h1 element acts as the selector. So what this role basically means for this h1 is that page, all the h1 elements on that page is going to assume the color of red, or they're going to have the color of red. Now something, if you look further to the right, you're going to see some syntax that looks quite strange, but it's still basically the same thing, right? This is an ID selector and this is a class selector. So the title, the hash symbol you have there signifies that that's an ID selector, and the dot symbol you have there signifies that that's a class selector. We will get into selectors in the future, but this is just to show you the CSS rule. So you have your selector, and then you have a declaration block. Right, moving on to the meta viewport element. This is one very element that should always be on your web pages. All right, so let's try to explain what this is. So this is a meta tag. We've talked about a meta tag before, but this one is specifically a meta viewport element. Now let me try to explain what this content means. Right, so this is telling the browser to match the width of that page to the width of the device. Right, so the browser is basically, you're telling the browser to match the width of the page to the width of the device. Right, and initial scale means that it should be zoomed to 100%. Right, it should be zoomed to 100%. This is very important for responsiveness, right, especially for mobile devices and tablet devices. All right, moving on to default browser styles. I think we probably have to head to yeah, to check out this guy. All right, so you can call it default browser styles, or you can call them user agent style. So there are the browser gives some stylings to some elements. If you remember when we talked about the h1 element, or the heading elements from h1 to h6, where h1 is the largest, right, that's default styling, and then h6 is the smallest. We don't do that, right? It's default. There are other elements that have some default styling. So you can see this h arrow basically adds a thin horizontal line, and this is a block quote element, so it does what it says. Block quote, right, is a quote. If you've ever noticed on any web page or website, you see like where there's a link and there's like an underline, that text has like an underline and the color of blue. That's like the browser's default styling for a link. I could try to show you guys some of this in a browser. All right, so yeah, you have your heading. This is h1, right, down to h6. You can see these are default stylings, and this is that h arrow element I spoke about, the thin horizontal line. And here, this text right here is the block quote, and below we have our link, and we have this is an ordered list, right, which is numbered 1 to 3, and this is an unordered list, which is a bulleted point. So yeah, the browser gives us some default styling, so even without applying, some things would just make a little bit more sense. Yeah, so moving on to the next thing, we have our inline, internal and external styling. It's very important to understand the differences between this type of styling. I should have an example. All right, so if you can see my screen, I have a p, right? I have a CSS rule. Basically this is a p tag, right, paragraph tag, which is acting as the selector, and then it has its property, color, and then the value of that property, which is blue. We have this styling inside our, what's it called, head tag here. And this is what we call internal styling. So for internal styling, you'd have this style tag, right? You have this style tag which has an opening and closing tag, and in between that you have your CSS rule or your CSS rules, right? And that's called internal styling. For inline styling, you basically have your styling inside the element, right? If you can see here, we inside our opening element, right, inside our opening tag, we have a property style, and inside it has a property and a value, right? Now it is very important for you to understand and know when to use these different stylings, right? It's very important. But there's also one called external. External, basically you're linking, you remember when we talked about this and we said a link tag has a property called relationship, right? REL attribute. And what does this mean? It means that it links this particular page to an external source or to an external file, right? So let's say we have our styles.css here, right? I already have some things here. Let me create another one. Let's see, what are we working about? Okay, styling. Let me name it style to the CSS. All right, and yeah, style to the CSS. Let's see, I gave it this guy selector, and let's see, color of orange. Yeah, now save these, go back to our page, and then link it, right? So my text editor already helps me to, right? And then I see the files that I can, and then it's linked. All right, so basically whenever whatever style I give, as long as it is selected properly, it's going to apply to this page. For best practice, you would want to use external styling, and the reason is because while using internal and inline, it's still okay, but when you're working on large projects, you want to use external because your code base or your code could get really long and it won't be readable. So for separation of concerns and readability, you would want to stick to external styling. All right, thank you for joining today. It's been a lengthy and nice one. See you on the next lesson. Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.